I am hosting our next session here, Strategies for Success, Federal Cloud Security in Action. What a great group on stage. I'll introduce them in just a moment. Little context. In response to the executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity, passed in May 2021, federal IT leaders are actively improving their security enterprises, leveraging resources like CISA, GSA FedRAMP. Ensuring cybersecurity pervades all agency operations remains a challenge. So you're going to get some great insight from this group. Next to me, Department of Labor's Chief Information Security Officer, Paul Blahish, Acting Chief Information Security Officer at CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and Acting Chief Information Security Officer, Keith Busby, Department of Commerce National Telecommunications and Information Administration's Security Chief Operations, Matthew Gonzalez, and last but not least, here on the end, Qualys VP of Product Management for Cloud Security, Naeem Islam. Welcome, all. So, Paul, you've been around the block for a little while, CISO since 2018. You've seen that executive order on cybersecurity years before it happened. You saw it drop. You've been implementing some of the measures contained therein. Give us a little history. What did that cybersecurity landscape look like before? What does it look like now, sir?
Well, but before the executive order, we were sitting around doing nothing, right? So, no, seriously, I mean, a lot of the things in the executive order were bubbling up for a long time, right? I mean, at least I think, using the Department of Labor as a typical organization, maybe we were moving to the cloud. I don't think in 2021 anyone still had on-prem email, and if they did, it was very small. So we were moving those types of things for performance and economic reasons out to the cloud for software as a service, right? And we were also moving some of our applications out to the cloud already. I think at that point we were probably about 50% maybe of on-prem and cloud type stuff. We were already moving to multi-factor authentication. We had an effort underway to do that, and we were encrypting the data. I mean, who wasn't encrypting some data, right? So you're encrypting data, you're doing this and that. We obviously were logging information too, and we had a security operations center. I think when you look at the executive order, you need to look at it in the context of history and what had gone on right before that. That I think CISA and the National Security Director in the White House all had these ideas that they wanted to do some things. And the catalyst to get these things rolling was SolarWinds. Because SolarWinds showed the vulnerabilities in the existing way of doing things, of having a castle and moat approach, of not knowing what your supply chain was. So you never let a good, there's a saying, you never let a good crisis go to waste, right? So here was SolarWinds came, it was a huge impact to the federal government, both for, we were compromised. It's just like someone came and robbed your house, right? It's like, oh my gosh, we were compromised. It took a lot of time and effort and money to recover from that. And it did give CISA, that their partners in the administration, and then eventually the president signing an executive order to say, we need to do better. The adversaries have advanced. They know how to get inside. They know that there's a soft middle to the inside, and they can get a foothold, they can expand out, and you're not going to detect them for a long time. We have to do better. And that's what the executive order really ticked all these boxes, right? Multi-factor authentication, so it's not as easy for someone to just get credentials and then attack your network. Encrypting things so that even if they can get to it, it's harder for them to really extract it out and use it. Supply chain, so that that if you have SolarWinds, that was part of the fun there, right? Do we even use this thing? And then I think you add Log4j on there, which really showed that you needed to know what ingredients were in all your products, because if there was a vulnerability, then you need to know which of your products were vulnerable. Zero trust is all about assuming that there is the bad guy in your network, and you need to make sure that They're not going to be able to pivot and expand out in your network because you don't trust any device just because it's inside your network, or any user just because they're inside your network. And they're going to be noisier, right? It's going to be a lot of, hey, what's going on there? I'm able to detect that. So I really think it brought, driven by SolarWinds, brought to a point a lot of the initiatives that were underway in most agencies, brought it, probably raised it up in profile, right? All of a sudden, the Secretary of Labor is saying to me, so what's all this stuff about that we need to do? Right? Because the White House is then calling the deputy secretaries and secretaries and saying, hey, you need to get on this. Your score's not good enough. So it really raised it in profile. Maybe the one thing it didn't do was I didn't get a big truck of money backed up to my agency. But it did make us reprioritize, look for opportunities that were out there to enable some of these technologies and really crystallize some of our choices.
Keith, I'm going to steal on a couple of things that he said there. CMS has a ton of data, a ton of sensitive, really important medical-oriented data. Paul talked a bit about encryption there. Did the executive order change CMS's security-based approach to data? And if so, how did it, sir?
I wouldn't necessarily say that it changed it, but it gave us some bite in the discussions with our business owners around it. Encryption was already a thing. We were already doing it. But this gave us more leverage to help justify the cost of them doing it. This was not something that we could fund because, as Paul mentioned, we did not get a truck of money either. This was something that we had to work throughout the agency to fund. And so we use the executive order, we use all executive orders to help us apply some of that pressure to get them to adjust their business processes, their cost allocation to cover these tools.
Matthew, a quick question, then an actual question. I'm assuming you also didn't get a truckload of money when the executive order passed.
If anybody did or knows how to, please let me know. We had a full plate, and as we spoke earlier, now we're just getting another plate. Same resources, but now you have all these additional requirements that you need to do as well. So how do you, biggest thing is train your workforce. You have a workforce that are already doing these things, and that's what ZTA also talks about in the executive order, providing more resources for training, but not only training, but sharing. Because now you make your job a little bit easier if you can share your information, talk with other agencies or colleagues that may have experienced the same thing, so now you don't have to reinvent the wheel. They've already solved this for you. Now you can save time reinventing it and just use what they did and tailor it to your system or to your applications. I think that's one key thing that kind of exposed and saying it's okay to share. Everybody was sharing a little bit internally, but now it's like a common thing where let's share this information, see how other people are doing it to ease our life. I think that was something that was really critical with the executive order, and CISA doing a big part of it, trying to allow us to collaborate. They have weekly calls and what have you when a new vulnerability comes out. So always communicating with your colleagues in the federal space allows you to reach out now, much easier than it was before.
Naeem, in my conversations with various cybersecurity professionals across government, a lot of them point to a shift in mindset in cybersecurity, moving from being reactive to being proactive. Can you talk a bit about that and maybe work in a key element that you're really passionate about, and that's threat detection?
Yeah, I would say that one of the really interesting things about the executive order was that there was a recognition that the way applications are developed has changed. And in the cloud, that acceleration only increased. In particular, you're seeing a lot of open source software being used. So one of the big things that the executive order talked about was supply chain attacks. How do you address that? I think Paul talked about a very famous one, which was the SolarWinds, real shock to people. But supply chain attacks are real, and they're accelerating because developers are uniformly using a lot of open source software. And that leads to threats coming to you from all kinds of different areas and avenues, and at a rapid clip. And I think when people were adopting the cloud, they were really not prepared to address this issue of all these threats coming in through supply chain. And this is something that, at Qualys we're very aware of, and something that we've taken to heart. And we hear from all of our customers, government and all sectors, that this is an emerging problem and it's only getting worse. And people are sharing. I mean, you think threat sharing is an important part, but software sharing has just become a natural part of the way in which applications are developed today. And it leads to sometimes inadvertent supply chain attacks and sometimes real malicious coordinated attacks from individuals. So that's a very important thing that anyone adopting the cloud really has to look into. And I think you'll see the community that's developing these tools is putting a lot of effort in developing tools to help you, clean up this software through software composition analysis, checking for vulnerabilities, checking for malware before you deploy it. So there's a very large effort, and I think you'll see a lot of activity going on in this space moving forward.
Keith, I was watching you out of the corner of my eye. You look ready to jump in there, sir.
So it's interesting. Historically, we treated threat detection vulnerabilities based off of OS scanning, right? And now there's a big shift into that, to the AppSec world, where we're starting to get into secret scanning, where we're starting to get into secure pipelines, where we're starting to do that static code analysis, the system composition analysis, all that looking into the libraries of applications and what they're doing versus just running a Tenable scan or a Qualys scan. But you already talked about how you guys are integrating that now. I think that also, the EO also helped shine a light on that kind of gap that we were basing our programs off of.
Containers. You guys mentioned it, but kind of scanning the containers. Now we're all going to the cloud. How are we scanning the containers?
Yeah.
Huge gap. It's now getting a little bit better with Qualys, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Some of you guys may be doing. I know Tenable's kind of catching up and doing more container scanning, but that's another key piece, because now we're in the cloud. We're not on-prem. We're not have a full OS. Now we have containers, right?
A lot of people shifted to the cloud, and they literally just did a lift and shift.
Lift and shift.
Just deploy Windows servers, Linux servers, whatever it is in the cloud instead of containerizing.
I'm modernizing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Lifting and shifting. That's not
I'll actually point out one really interesting thing going back to the threat question. And we have a copy of our Qualys Total Cloud Truth Insights white paper. If you guys get a chance, there's a copy up there. But a very interesting observation over the end of last year and beginning of this year was that we saw that people were trying to steal not just data, but also compute. And it was a bit of a surprise. We saw a pretty big increase in cryptojacking, people trying to get compute resources. Obviously, that's for mining, for coins, but then it was being used for lateral movement. So this total sort of new class of malware for the cloud was a bit of a surprise. I thought that would, after ransomware, you'd see something like that. But compute stealing is here today, and certainly you're going to see it in the government as well, people trying to attempt it. And being able to detect these sorts of attacks is absolutely critical. Subtle attacks, things that are not known, unknown attacks, where I think is going to be increasing. And I think the migration to the cloud was so fast. One of the things I've realized is that people are just starting to learn just basic APIs and how to keep your hygiene, like your misconfigurations and your vulnerabilities under check. But that's very hard to do, particularly when you go really, really fast. And I think just like everybody else, there was a lot of pressure to just migrate to the cloud, and so everyone just does it blindly. And then that leaves holes for people, attackers to get in. And so you have to have a mechanism, even once you've done your basic hygiene, mechanisms to detect subtle and unknown threats like SolarWinds. It's just not going to stop. So we have to be really ready.
Paul, did you want to jump in there?
I was going to pull on that thread of supply chain a little bit more. And supply chain goes from A to Z, right? And I think what we're talking about when we're looking for vulnerabilities is closer to that Z end. Right? That's the software we've already procured it in some way, obtained it, and we've deployed it, and now we're noticing that there's vulnerabilities. Well, guess what? We need to move closer to A, right? And that's what I'm going to channel my CISA and National Cyber Director friends now. That's where Secure by Design comes in. That's where the purchasing power of the federal government comes in to tell software vendors that we're not going to do business with you unless you create secure software. Again, I'm sort of remembering something that was said by CISA reps or administration people, but it's almost like software is one of the only industries where people can make dangerous stuff and deliver it to you without, and they say it's your fault. Well, you need to fix it, right? It's not my problem, it's your problem once you buy it. So we need to shift that conversation. No, I need quality from you, and quality doesn't just mean that it's got bells and whistles. It means that it's secure by design. And when we were starting to talk about this probably about 2 years ago, I realized that this was the thing that was going to impact my 95-year-old mother-in-law the most, right? If we can drive secure by design, then her using an application maybe to get medical services is going to make her phone safer that she's using to do that, and everything else. So I do want to make sure that when we talk about supply chain, we realize that this is a big chain.
Yes.
And the more we can do at A, the less we have to do at Z.
Matthew, if I could draw us back to threat detection for a bit. Before we came up on stage, you talked about some of the formative work that your office has been doing in the SOC, the Security Operations Center. Give our audience kind of a thumbnail of the work that you're doing there now and maybe where you hope to take it in the future.
Yeah, what we want to do. I'm trying to do it. That's the problem, right? Limited resources, then obviously technology, but doing research on, obviously the key word is AI, right? Everybody has logs. We're talking about all these logs, and that's what ZTA was. Give me all your logs. There's been, 3 revisions of it? Hey, we need to do these logs now, kind of honing it in more and more. I know what you said, it just came so fast, but that's why there's been so many iterations of it. Now it's a little bit more defined, a little bit more defined, a little bit more defined. But the data, and what I want to do is kind of get that alert fatigue off. How do we get the alert fatigue down? Been doing research, there's a lot of AI stuff out there, and then your playbooks. Anybody who's got some type of SOC or your SOARs and kind of orchestration of creating those playbooks and using the data that's there. And there's a lot of vendors out there, people out there doing AI SOCs. What are the AI SOCs doing? The low-hanging fruit. Analyzing all those low-hanging fruit to boil it up, giving you a summary. A lot of what the generative AI does is what a lot of use cases are, right? I want a summaries of my emails. I want a summary of the threats that are low. Is there anything that's boiling up that I should maybe make a level medium or critical? How do we do that? It's tough. Or how do you have your analysis continue? They may miss something because there's alert fatigue. They may miss something that correlated with some other alert that came through. But the only way to really do that is getting on one single pane of glass and helping using machine learning and AI to kind of correlate all that information for you to give you something that's actionable. And now traceability going back to where this came from. And that's talking about the applications, all these different websites and your databases, your containers, everywhere. We're living everywhere now. We have applications, we have a footprint everywhere. How do you understand where it's coming from and then quickly respond to it so that you can mitigate the
right,
threat?
and with limited human resources,
Yes.
right? So how are you going to tip that to our favor? And I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I still have the same staff.
Yep.
More applications, more footprints, more platforms that I have to now monitor.
Here, monitor more stuff.
Yes.
How are you going to do?
And they want us to send all of our logs. So now if you're sending all the logs, before it was like, hey, user access, failed logins, all that good stuff. Now they want database transactions. Those are hefty logs. Every transaction, every database, that's gigs of data.
Yep.
And now we're talking about multiple websites, multiple applications. Now we're talking about petabytes. So what data lake are you using? Now you have it in the data lake. How quickly can you search petabytes of data? So those are all the things that we're working on solutioning and working with different vendors to kind of figure out who has the best and how efficient. And now everybody doesn't want to talk about it, but it's a major thing is how much does it cost? A data lake, are you searching? Is it per search or per ingest? Is it historical? Now I need to go back 16 months. What's that going to cost me? Now I got to renormalize it, research it.
Yeah.
Like there's so many different ways where you're getting costed. So there's a lot of challenges that we're trying to achieve and kind of figure out the best solution for it.
The new skill for a cyber professional, being an accountant, by the way, because that's what you have.
Keith, there's something I want to pull out there for you, but before I do, Naeem, you look
I just
ready to
wanted
jump in.
A quick thing here. I think it's very important to understand that the primary purpose of AI is to help automate tasks. Is as Matthew was talking about. And I think we're seeing two different things happen. One is in the certain classes of threat detection, like malware detection and certain kinds of threats like SolarWinds, it's gotten a lot better, and it's really helped us, instead of spending days looking at things and just staring at screens, help you come to a conclusion about a threat. So I think it's been very helpful. And I do think that movement to the cloud is complicated, the data we're looking at. So I think we're the initial stages of coming up with more accurate sort of aids that can help us resolve threats in the cloud. But we're going to get there. The other thing that's obviously happened with generative AI is that we have one of the best writing tools that's ever existed in history. And so the great American novel is yet to be written, but will be by probably a generative AI tool. But this whole notion of doing analysis, summarization, and being able to communicate risk, to communicate information about what you've seen, is going to make dramatic leaps and bounds in the next months. It's not too far away. So I think this communication aspect, which is an incredibly important aspect of what we do, because as practitioners, we sometimes see very, very complicated things, and we have difficulty communicating it to a broader audience, to different personas. I think that's going to change dramatically, and it's going to happen in a shorter time frame than once we figured things out. So I think the communication aspect will change very rapidly.
Just one quick point. It's just a starting point.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
I agree.
keyword. It's a starting point. Hey, give me a summary. That's your starting point. You still need that human intervention. Do not trust it. Everybody knows it can lie. We all know AI lies, but it's a great starting point to give you, hey, give me a summary or write this up for me. Yeah. Now you have to still take the human element into it and say, okay, that doesn't make sense. Right. Let me adjust this.
Right. Our key is to find the sweet spot of where the human needs to get involved there, right? Where do we put the human in the workflow with the AI? And it's probably going to start moving a little bit this way, but yeah, we're still human.
Keith, I'm going to ask you a long-winded question here, but I promise I'm going somewhere with this, okay? One of the most difficult things to me about a CISO's portfolio in government is balancing these dual imperatives from the White House. You have the executive order on cybersecurity. You also have a ton of guidance on CX and improving CX all across government. You don't want to be a roadblock to CX improvements, but you don't want to allow cyber bad actors to infiltrate your crucially important networks. CMS, perfect example. Matthew was talking a bit about apps and applications. What kind of paces do you have to put those through so that you ensure that the public-facing elements of your IT enterprise are not compromised? You want to improve CX, but you got to make sure it's secure.
So I'm a big believer in attack surface management and secure CI/CD pipelines. And I think as we get into the application world, that's where we should really be focusing on. A resilient system can still have a good customer experience, right? And so just pushing that through a secure pipeline, looking at the code itself, will inherently provide a better customer experience because it will find bugs, it will find that imperfect experience.
Paul, where does AI plug in? We just heard AI's potential for cybersecurity phrased as transformational a moment ago. In the Department of Labor, where do you see it making the most impact, at least initially?
Well, we think it's going to make an impact across everything the Department of Labor does, and that, providing service to citizens, providing service to people seeking jobs, to retirees, et cetera. Now, you may be talking about how's it going to impact cybersecurity, but we see it helping, or you need to look for opportunities out across the board, better user experience through AI. I mean, it doesn't seem as sexy maybe as other things, but chatbots are a form of AI, and if we can put chatbots out there so that someone can get answers to their, wage and hour questions at 2 o'clock in the morning, when we don't have someone picking up the phone, then that's an improvement for the citizen, right? So we're looking on ways to use AI, I think, across the spectrum of services that meet our mission, right? But as far as cybersecurity goes, I think there's a traditional way, and we've been doing this for a long time. AI just got a front page because of things like it can make deep fakes, and kids were plagiarizing stuff off this sort of generative AI type of thing with large language models is what now I think your general population thinks of as AI. But AI for us was always things like machine learning, SOAR. That was artificial intelligence and machine learning for us. For years, maybe even a decade or more, we haven't been sitting looking at individual streams of logs. We've had something correlating them and showing us alerts off of individual events. So we've been doing that, and we'll continue to do that, and I think it's going to get better and better and better, and it has to, because the volume of information that we're seeing is getting better and better and better. So I think those algorithms also will get better to be able to draw out, here's the important thing to look at in all of this mess. The other thing it's going to help with is workforce, because we can use AI to do some of the lower level things, so that not only can we do more with the same amount of people, but we can make their jobs more interesting. Right? You are no longer writing a system security plan that takes you, I don't know, 2 weeks to write the system security plan. Use a generative AI tool to go and create a system security plan. Now all you're doing is reviewing it, tweaking it, modifying it. So this is a way, I think, for us to leverage artificial intelligence to improve our ability to recruit and retain personnel, which is going to get harder and harder to do, I think.
One thing you just touched on, the resources and making it easier. Obviously, I touched on earlier, we have a full plate, we have more requirements coming. AI will allow us to digest, I said this earlier, digest the food already on our plate, to free up time and resources that we already have to do more. We're taking on new requirements. We still got these requirements over here. That's where we can try to leverage AI to make these easier. That way people aren't losing their jobs. I think you were going to mention that, but AI is not going to take over our jobs. Hopefully we can leverage them to make our jobs easier, so that we can take on more and take on all these new requirements that are going to continue to come. This year's ZTA, come next year is going to be another executive order, or we have to do this. So how do we continue to keeping up at that pace? Because the budget's not coming.
Post-quantum cryptography will be coming.
There you go. So,
Thanks.
Keith?
So we're looking at using it as a force multiplier, right? So we're looking at using it for gap analysis with policy, for helping us write policy, and more of that plain language, so that more non-professionals can understand what we're trying to say. That's where I see the most immediate impact for us. Is policy is always going to be a reactive thing. And so leveraging AI to help look at the policy, look at what we're doing, look at how we've been doing things, and then telling us what we're missing and helping us recraft what we need to do, and getting it out to the public so that they can understand it.
maybe we can get policy in under 3 years.
That's a push.
Naeem, stepping back from any individual agency story here, FedRAMP is part of the sort of abstract of this discussion. The Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program managed by GSA, the General Services Administration. It has been iterating over the years. They put out a lot of new guidance in 2024. What kind of impact do you think FedRAMP is having all across government relative to cloud security?
I think it's a really important part of a basic thing that a vendor like Qualys needs to have. Our products that we have are compliant. And so these rules apply not just to the internal CSP systems, the cloud providers that the government is using, but all the vendors now have a common framework on which to operate. And I think that's absolutely critical. We've not had those standards before. We've not had those guidelines to move forward. And some of those are absolutely critical to make sure that the data that the government has is kept secure. So I think it's important that everyone participating in the ecosystem, in the marketplace, all adheres to these standards. And as they get better and as we understand the cloud a little bit better, these become absolutely critical. One thing I would say is that the cloud providers themselves, they have their commercial side and then they have their government side. And and the commercial side is evolving really, really fast. And I think it's going to be an interesting challenge to see as also the government side, the new APIs, the new structural mechanisms, new managed services that appear, how they translate and how they're kept secure with these new guidelines. Like serverless is an example, that something that's not common that you see in your on-premises environment, but it's a fundamental way in which you structure applications in the cloud. So what's the rapidity of change and making sure that you can continue to be secure is something that I think is important for the government agencies to be sort of abreast of and help the community so that we can also participate in keeping our services up to date with the changes that are taking place. But it's an absolutely critical framework for everyone to participate in.
Paul, I'd like to take us in a slightly different direction. I've heard you talk before about the importance of partnerships. Partnerships across your own agency, partnerships with the private sector, partnerships with key agencies like GSA or like CISA who put together standards for all of government. Just tee up this portion of conversation. What makes a good partnership? What are you looking for?
Well, I think most specific, let's start with our commercial vendors, right? And our CIO is fond of telling them, we're not looking for a vendor, we're looking for partners. And I think the difference is a partner takes the time to understand what your goals are and what types of things are important to you. Well, while as someone who's just there to sell you a product is going to tell you, you need this because it does blank, without understanding what my needs are. And a partner will grow with you, and a partner will share with you things that they've got coming up that can help you. But first they need to understand your business. And there is an old saying, I think I'm up here because I'm old, right? Because there's an old saying.
That's what he said earlier.
There's an old saying that we're not going to care how much you know till we know how much you care, right? So we need to get that feeling that you're in this with us, and your product space, you understand what we're trying to do, and here's how your product space can help us. And not only help us to buy more product, but also how to become leaner, more efficient, how to reprioritize things, use our money better. A lot of our partners have been very good, for instance, about the logging stuff. They could have just said, well, you're doing a lot more logging, you're going to need to pay us a lot more money to store that. But they've been very good about, hey, let's think of smarter ways to store all that data. Do you need it right now? Well, no, we just need it in case there's an incident later. Well, then you don't need to store that in an expensive place. You can store that in a cheaper place. And that's a partner talking to you, right? Not just someone who says, ooh, what's my bottom line? I want to make money off this, and you need to store more data. Now, as far as partnering with CISA and others, we were talking about FedRAMP and cloud providers, and I was talking about this being the three-legged stool, right? We need FedRAMP, helps define some of the standards and do some of the oversight. The vendor needs to be there meeting the FedRAMP requirements and doing the things they're supposed to do. And yet us as the using agency, we've got a role too. And I know sometimes some of the folks within my organization kind of forget that role. They go, well, it's FedRAMPed, so it must be okay. No, we still have a big role to do, or else this stool falls over. We have to make sure that we're partnering, say with FedRAMP and with the vendor, say, what are you doing? What are you doing? What am I doing? And together, it's supposed to make up this whole then, right? And that's partnering in that way.
That's that shared responsibility matrix, the Kanban activities. A lot of people forget about that.
Yeah. They go, well, I got a FedRAMP stamp on here. Isn't that enough?
Yeah. But two things. You mentioned logging. I think the kind of initial, everybody's like, okay, I'm just sending my logs. As long as you're sending your logs, you're checking a box, right? But unless you actually create a rule or data collector rule and interpret that log, if you're sending it via syslog, it's just syslog. Or if you're just sending JSON, you know what I mean? You have to interpret. You have to collect a rule that, hey, I got this log from this device. This is this. Unless you're identifying the logs and being able to recall those, just sending the logs is not it. So please, please, please don't just send your logs. Make sure you're receiving them and being able to parse them correctly. because just sending the logs ain't it. And then kind of talk about the FedRAMP piece. The 3 PAOs, you didn't mention those, but those are a huge thing. Having some type of more consistency, I'm sure you've gone through many sponsorships yourself, but has any of those packages been the same? Each one is a lot different, and that's where you're talking about the agency really has to come in and do their due diligence, because no FedRAMP package is the same. You can request the packages, the 3 PAOs, they're all going to give their own interpretation of the rule, just like any assessment, right? So it's really on the agency to really do the due diligence to work and be involved in that entire process. Because from the beginning, if you're sponsoring, you're there from the beginning to the end. So, and then, yes, it's in the marketplace, and when you get the package, it's your responsibility to really do the customer required controls and reviewing those.
Right, the congressional committee is not going to call the 3 PAO in to talk about why that compromise happened, right?
Exactly.
Naeem, close us out with a nugget of wisdom, sir.
Well, I think one of the things that I was actually at RSA a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about sort of emerging threats, and with new tools, the attackers are getting a lot more creative. One of the things the attackers don't do, because it's in their business to act sort of independently, is they don't share threat information enough amongst themselves. But I think as we migrate to the cloud and we see this world evolving, we're going to have to share a lot more data about threats. We've done that with malware, with things like VirusTotal, et cetera, in the public sector. We've done that with vulnerability databases, but I think we need to have significantly more sharing if we're going to thwart this massive new wave of automated attacks, all the way from the basic hygiene stuff that they're going to go after to dynamic stuff and subtle things we don't see. But I think the government can play a tremendous role in helping with that. So I'd love to see more fora for sharing cloud threat data so we can all get safer together.
Mm-hmm. One thing I love about covering public sector is every agency's mission is so unique. So if you want a more technical deep dive on these threat elements, the demo stage out there is a great opportunity. You can even get your own risk reports. I'd like to give a big thank you before I send us all to a brief break to our wonderful panel, Paul Blahush, Keith Busby, Matthew Gonzalez, and Naeem Islam.